The Synod of Vel'kari had convened on 17 worlds simultaneously, as it always did when the scrolls were threatened. High Theologian Orvith VII stood at the center of the observation ring, his secondary hearts beating in a rhythm his physicians would have called distress. Around him, 43 Vel'kari scholars, the finest minds in the conclave, pressed against the viewing glass and said nothing. Below, on the surface of Cradle Station, the human was on fire. Not metaphorically. The plasma conduit had ruptured at 0340 station time. A Vel'kari emergency. Report would later describe it as a Class 4 thermodynamic cascade failure, the kind of event for which their engineering doctrine had a single, clear procedure: evacuate a radius of 60 meters, seal the compartment, and wait for the plasma to discharge harmlessly into the vacuum bleeds. The procedure took 11 minutes. The human, technician Jordan Hayes, had 11 seconds. Hayes had been running a routine inspection of the tertiary power relay when the housing cracked. The plasma, channeled solar fire, compressed and magnetized, hot enough to unmake steel, erupted from the conduit in a lance of white-blue light aimed directly at the fuel coupling that connected to the station's inhabited ring. Orvith VII had been watching on the security feed because he found human maintenance routines philosophically interesting. They moved through their work with a kind of focused inefficiency he had never been able to categorize. They hummed to themselves. They paused to look at things that were not relevant to their tasks. They seemed, at all times, to be only partially paying attention. He was paying very close attention now. The first scroll of Vel'kari, written in the age before Starflight, contained a passage that every child of the conclave could recite from memory. The divine light is not for the flesh to hold. The flesh is temporary. The flesh is soft. The flesh ends where the sacred fire begins. This is the first law of the living body, and it does not bend. For 11,000 years, this passage had been used to explain why the Vel'kari built their plasma systems with such extreme redundancy. 6 failsafes. For evacuation protocols. Automatic shutdown triggers rated to engage before any living body could be exposed to a direct stream. They had designed entire civilizations around this axiom. The flesh cannot hold the fire. Jordan Hayes apparently had not read the scrolls. What happened next took 0.8 seconds. Orvith VII would spend the remaining 40 years of his life trying to parse it. Hayes did not run. Hayes did not freeze. Hayes turned toward the rupture, dropped into a low stance that the human military files would later identify as a load-bearing brace, reached into the emergency toolkit on their belt, and pulled out a magnetic containment collar, a device rated to redirect plasma flow in a broken pipe, not in open air, not in an active stream, not while said stream was already moving at 40 meters per second toward a fuel coupling that, if struck, would kill everyone on the inhabited ring. The collar needed to be placed at the rupture point. The rupture point was inside the stream. Hayes looked at this situation for approximately 0.3 seconds. Then they put their arm into the plasma bolt. The observation ring went silent in a way that had no name in the Vel'kari language, because the Vel'kari had never needed a word for it. It was the silence of a species watching an axiom break. The plasma hit Hayes's arm. The arm did not unmake. Hayes screamed, a sound the universal translator rendered, inadequately, as pain vocalization, extreme, and their legs buckled, and for one terrible moment it looked like they would fall, and the collar would miss, and everything would end. But the arm stayed in the stream. The hand moved through the fire, navigating by some logic that had nothing to do with what was survivable, and the magnetic containment collar clicked into place around the rupture point. The plasma bent. The stream redirected into the vacuum bleed. The fuel coupling held. 37 seconds later, the automatic shutdown engaged, and the conduit went cold. Jordan Hayes collapsed onto the deck plating, cradling a left arm that was burned from wrist to shoulder, and said something the translator rendered as, "That was really, really stupid." Then they laughed. Orvith VII did not understand the laugh. He had studied humans for 6 standard years. He still did not understand the laugh. The medical report came through 4 hours later. 2nd and 3rd degree burns. Across 60% of the left arm. 2 fingers with nerve damage. A dislocated shoulder from the initial impact force. Significant soft tissue trauma. Survivable. Orvith 7 read this word 4 times. Survivable. He pulled up the Vel'kari Biological Tolerance Database, the most comprehensive study of physiological limits in the known conclave, 1,400 species cataloged over 9 millennia, and ran the parameters. A. Direct plasma stream at that temperature and velocity, sustained contact for 0.8 seconds. He queried every entry. 0 species in the database would have survived with the limb attached. 41 species in the database would not have survived at all. He ran the query again, in case he had made an error. He had not made an error. Junior scholar Vin12 found the high theologian sitting alone in the archive 3 hours after station midnight, surrounded by open scrolls and the blue glow of a dozen data slates, all displaying the same human. High theologian, Vin12 said carefully. You have missed the evening convocation and the morning one. Sit down, said Orvith 7. Vin12 sat. Tell me what you know about the humans, Orvith 7 said. Not the diplomatic files. Not the cultural briefings. What do you actually know? Vin12 thought about this. They are loud, he offered. They form emotional attachments to inanimate objects. They have a biological threat response that bypasses rational processing almost entirely. They call it fight or flight, though the files suggest a third state they call freeze. Their pain tolerance is, he paused, high, relative to most species. High. Orvith 7 repeated flatly. Yes. I watched a human put their arm into a plasma bolt today, Vin. Not through it, not past it, into it, and choose to keep it there until the work was done. He set down the data slate. The first scroll says the divine fire is not for the flesh to hold. Yes, said Vin12, uncertain where this was going. The flesh held it. Silence. The flesh held it. Orvith 7 said again, quieter, and complained about it, and laughed afterward. And then, I checked, asked the medical team how soon they could return to duty. He looked at his junior scholar. Hayes was cleared for light work in 72 hours. They filed a maintenance report. They included a recommended upgrade to the conduit housing to prevent future failures. He paused. They also apparently spent the intervening time teaching a game called Cards to the nursing staff. Vin12 said nothing for a long moment. High theologian, he said slowly. Are you suggesting that the first scroll is wrong? Orvith 7 was quiet for a very long time. I am suggesting, he said at last, that the Vel'kari who wrote the first scroll had never met a human. The theological crisis that followed was, by Vel'kari standards, relatively contained. Only 4 splinter sects, 2 formal heresy trials, and 1 strongly worded letter from the third convocation of doctrinal purity. Orvith 7 survived all of it. He was, after all, not the first Vel'kari to find his faith complicated by contact with humanity. He would not be the last. There was even, by the time he was old and the star charts had changed and the conclave had grown to include human members on advisory councils, a word for it in the theological vocabulary. The word translated, roughly, as the sensation of watching something impossible happen and then quietly updating your understanding of what impossible means. It was considered a holy word. It happened, the revised scrolls eventually noted, with remarkable frequency. Around humans. Jordan Hayes retired from Cradle Station 18 years later with a left arm that still ached in cold weather, a collection of card games from 17 different species, and a small commendation plaque from the Vel'kari Conclave that read, in their script, something that translated roughly as, for demonstrating that our limits were, in fact, ours. Hayes kept it on the wall above the kitchen table. They never really understood why it seemed to mean so much to the Vel'kari. That, Orvith 7 had once written in his private journals, was perhaps the most human thing about them.